a demotion in terms of what is considered importance in portfolio-wise, but it was largely expected that Richard Marles, he is the Deputy Prime Minister, and in that role, as we know, he gets the pick of portfolios. So he has chosen to take on that all-important defence portfolio, and not at a particularly easy time. We're facing some pretty challenging strategic environments, so you can expect to see a lot of Defence Minister Richard Marles, and you can see him right there sitting next to the Foreign Minister Penny Wong, and of course the Treasurer Jim Chalmers, all forming part of the very sort of senior ranks of the Anthony Albanese government.
And of course Penny Wong sitting there next to Richard Marles. Well, hasn't she had a pretty incredible first week in office? She was on that flight to Tokyo with Anthony Albanese and then returning briefly before going on a whirlwind trip of the Pacific. Of course, that's been a real focus for the new incoming government. One of their first major tasks is trying to repair relationships and also with the Solomon Islands, but really to push back, I guess, against China's growing influence in the region. She's been overseas for much longer than she has been in Canberra, so she's certainly had a lot of work to be doing.
It has been a pretty extraordinary week to have Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong crisscrossing the Pacific alongside her Chinese counterpart. Well, not alongside, at the same time as her Chinese counterpart, and I think that this really kind of sharpens the focus on the, I suppose, geostrategic environment we find ourselves in. China is looking to build up its influence in this region. Australia is obviously very wary of that and is trying to ensure that our Pacific neighbours, know that Australia wants to be the kind of security partner of choice. So it was a very deliberate move from Penny Wong to ensure that after the Quad meeting in Tokyo, she was straight off to the Pacific to really show Pacific neighbours how important they are to Australia.
That's right, and we can see just behind Penny Wong there is the former opposition leader in Bill Shorten. Now, in terms of his ministerial responsibilities, well, he's going to keep a focus on the National Disability Insurance Scheme and in government services, but that portfolio will be brought into Cabinet, so there will be the benefit of somebody of his experience also in there. We're panning along and we can see Tanya Plibasek there, somebody who, as Matt Doran mentioned earlier, she has also had a change of ministerial portfolio. For a long time, she's been focused on education and the tertiary sector. Some people were surprised to see that she switched to the environment, but the bells are ringing, which means that the ceremony is about to begin as the Prime Minister walks into the room.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a very warm welcome to Government House, dear alumni. Dawa Nuna, Dawa Nuna. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Nuna people, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and emerging leaders, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders gathered here with us this morning. My name is Paul Singer and I'm the Governor-General's Official Secretary. Shortly I'll announce the arrival of Her Excellency's Governor-General Mrs Hurley, and then ask that you remain standing and join in the singing of the first verse of the Australian National Anthem. I'll then invite the Prime Minister to present the members of his ministry to be sworn in by the Governor-General. Once the ceremony is concluded, the Prime Minister and his ministry will be invited to join the Governor-General on the state entrance stairs to the official photograph, and guests will be invited to join Mrs Hurley in the dining room where refreshments will be served. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand for the arrival of Her Excellency's Governor-General of Australia, Mr Hurley, and the singing of the Australian National Anthem.
Our home is just my
now invite the Prime Minister to present his ministry.
Your Excellency, I am pleased to present members of the full ministry. The Honourable Richard Marles MP as Minister for Defence, also to be known as the Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Miles, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Minister for Defence.
I, Richard Donald Marles, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Minister for Defence, so help me God.
And this is Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister to Anthony Albanese and Australia's new Defence Minister, signing his commission in front of the Governor-General David Hurley. Mr Marles was elected back in 2007 and has some ministerial experience, having served in Kevin Rudd's government briefly as the Trade Minister.
Wong as Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Ms Wong, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Minister for Foreign Affairs.
I, Penelope Yin Wong, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the office of Minister for Foreign Affairs, so help me God.
That is Penny Wong, who is signing her commission as Foreign Minister. Of course, she was sworn in last week as well. A significant moment as the first foreign-born Foreign Minister for Australia, an important player, particularly as Australia tries to rebuild its influence in the region. There also a lot of experience in the previous Labor government, somebody that I guess those more new to the scene that can call on for advice.
The Honourable Dr. Jim Chalmers Mp as Treasurer.
Dr Chalmers, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Treasurer.
I, James Edward Chalmers, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Treasurer, so help me God.
Jim Chalmers sworn in as the Federal Treasurer. Now, he was elected back in 2013, so he has served his entire time in Parliament in opposition. Now is his time in Cabinet for the very first time. A Queenslander who's entering this portfolio in a very difficult economic environment. Huge debt and deficit in the budget, rising inflation and interest rates, all issues that Labor will now need to confront.
As Minister for Finance and Minister for the Public Service and Minister for Women.
Ms Gallagher, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Minister for Finance, Minister for the Public Service and Minister for Women.
I, Catherine Ruth Gallagher, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the offices of the Minister for Finance, the Minister for the Public Service and Minister for Women.
Senator Katie Gallagher being sworn in as the Finance, Public Service and Minister for Women as well. Last week, she was sworn into really a smorgasbord of ministerial portfolios that saw her acting as Health Minister for a short period of time, announcing some news about booster eligibility. She is a former ACT Chief Minister, has had a pretty meteoric rise in the Labor Party, particularly known, building a name for herself in Senate Estimates Committees as well.
Senator, the Honourable Don Farrell as Minister for Trade and Tourism and Special Minister of State.
Mr Farrell, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Minister for Trade and Tourism and Special Minister for State.
Donald Edward Farrell, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the offices of Minister for Trade and Tourism and Special Minister of State, so help me God.
South Australian Senator Don Farrell, arguably one of the winners in this new frontbench team. He takes on trade and tourism as well as Special Minister of State. He's also a senior sort of member of the Senate. He's a right faction power broker. Now, his promotion to Deputy Leader in the Senate sort of impacts the gender balance. It was a role Christina Keneally held, but of course she wasn't successful in making the move to the House of Reps. So Senator Farrell there as the Deputy Leader in the Senate, as well as his new portfolios.
Tanya Plibasek MP as Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and Minister for the Arts.
Mr Burke, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and Minister for the Arts.
I, Anthony Stephen Burke, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the offices of Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and Minister for the Arts. So help me God.
This is Tony Burke, the Employment, Industrial Relations and Arts Minister, being sworn in with what looks like one of the biggest Bibles I think I've ever seen in my life. His portfolio responsibilities will be staying the same. He featured on the campaign trail a lot when Anthony Albanese was taking questions about industrial relations, particularly the Better Off Overall test as well. Now, Minister for the Arts as well, a very keen music fan himself, sometimes shares that on social media too, but somebody with a lot of experience within the Labor Party.
Butler MP as Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Mr Butler, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Minister for Health and Aged Care.
I, Mark Christopher Butler, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the office of Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Mark Butler, Australia's new Health and Ageing Minister. Now, this is a portfolio that he held in opposition and had a very high-profile role, given we've just been through more than 2 years of the COVID pandemic. Another very experienced member of Mr Albanese's frontbench team, elected back in 2007, the Rudd slide, and served in Cabinet under Mr Rudd. Now, for our viewers watching this, it is interesting to note that the order in which these MPs are being sworn in is their order of seniority.
As Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Mr Bowen, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
I, Christopher Isles Guy Bowen, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the office of Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Chris Bowen, the new Minister for Climate Change and Energy, he has a real task ahead of him. Of course, the Prime Minister has declared he wants to end the climate wars. Now, he will have a say on that, leading the climate change portfolio. And of course, energy. With news just this morning that energy prices are really increasing across the country. And of course, the cost of living, a key issue for many voters, not just during the campaign, but ongoing, a real challenge for the new government.
The Honourable Tanya Plibasek MP as Minister for Environment and Water.
Ms Plibasek, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Minister for Environment and Water.
I, Tanya Jane Plibasek, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the office of Minister for the Environment and Water.
Tanya Plibasek, Australia's new Minister for the Environment and Water, a 24-year veteran of federal parliament. She's actually the longest-serving woman in the House of Representatives. Now, this is a really big change of portfolio. She'd held education for years in opposition, now moving to environment and water. Anthony Albanese said it was a portfolio that she was happy to take on, but has certainly raised some eyebrows. after it was announced last night. She's a very experienced, long-serving Member of Parliament.
The Honourable Catherine King MP as Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Ms King, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
I, Catherine Fiona King, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the office of Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
That's Catherine King, the new Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development, somebody who has been in the Labor Party for a long time, briefly a Cabinet Minister when Labor was in government in 2013. She's been very critical of the former government's handling of infrastructure, been criticising it of pork barrelling. Now, Labor has promised to do differently. It'll be interesting to see how she manages that responsibility.
As Minister for Social Services.
I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Minister for Social Services.
I, Amanda Louise Wishworth, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the office of Minister for Social Services, so help me God.
Amanda Rishworth, South Australian Labor MP, who has also switched portfolios. She held childcare or early education in opposition. She now takes on the massive social services portfolio, responsible for everything from age pension to the job seeker allowance. She's also been in Parliament since 2007, so brings a great deal of experience. But again, this would be considered a big step up into the social services portfolio.
The Honourable Bill Shorten MP as Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and Minister for Government Services.
Mr Shorten, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Minister for National Disability Insurance Scheme and Minister for Government Services.
I, William Richard Shorten, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the offices of Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and Minister for Government Services.
Bill Shorten there, a former Labor leader being sworn in as the Minister for NDIS and Government Services. Last night he actually tweeted a message to Anthony Albanese saying thank you and that he will not let him down. He, of course, has been campaigning on the NDIS for the duration of the campaign, and he will be promoted into Cabinet as well. It'll be interesting to see what role he plays in the new government. He wasn't overly seen a lot during the campaign. That could change now that Labor are in government.
The Honourable Linda Burney MP to be sworn as Executive Councillor and Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Ms Burney, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Linda Jean Burney, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
Linda Burney, Australia's new Minister for Indigenous Australians. This is an historic moment. Linda Burney, the first woman to serve as Indigenous Affairs Minister after Ken Wyatt, who lost his seat of Hasluck at the election, the Coalition Minister. Ms Burney was elected to federal politics in 2019.
The affirmation of office as Minister for Indigenous Australians.
I, Linda Jean Burney, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth for Australia, her land and her people in the office of Minister for Indigenous Australia.
All right, Ms Burney there, elected in 2019 but has a lot of experience as a state Labor MP in New South Wales. She has a huge task ahead of her, basically preparing a referendum to establish an Indigenous voice to Parliament, all emanating, of course, from the Uluru Statement from the Heart. A big priority for the Anthony Albanese Labor government in its first term. There getting a very loud round of applause from her colleagues and those in the audience. Pretty remarkable moment.
You better stop or I might be able to go on. The Honourable Mark Dreyfus, QC MP, as Attorney General and Cabinet Secretary.
Mr Dreyfus, I'd like you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Attorney General and Cabinet Secretary.
I, Mark Alfred Dreyfus, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the offices of Attorney General and Cabinet Secretary, so help me God.
That's Mark Dreyfus, Australia's new Attorney General. He's been waiting a long time for this role. He was very briefly Attorney General in 2013. He is the second Jewish Attorney General after Isaac Isaacs in the 1930s, I believe, of which his seat of Isaacs in Melbourne's suburbs is named after. He has an incredible challenge ahead of him as well with the National Integrity Commission, something that Labor had really been campaigning strongly on. He tweeted last night that he's very keen to get on with that task.
The Honourable Brendan O'Connor MP as Minister for Skills and Training.
Mr O'Connor, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Minister for Skills and Training.
I, Brendan Patrick John O'Connor, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the office of Minister for Skills and Training.
Brendan O'Connor being sworn in as the new Skills and Training Minister. Now, this is quite familiar to him. He actually served in this very portfolio nearly a decade ago under Kevin Rudd back in 2013, but it's not the role he's held in opposition. He was the opposition defence spokesman. That has now been handed to Richard Miles, and so Mr O'Connor, who is a veteran of the Parliament, 21 years in federal Parliament, takes on Skills and Training.
MP as Minister for Education.
Mr Clare, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Minister for Education.
I, Jason Dean Clare, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the office of Minister for Education.
Jason Clare being sworn in as the new Minister for Education. He had previously been focused on housing, but he's held a range of positions within the Labor Party. Of course, many people got to know him during the campaign as the spokesman for the Labor Party, particularly when Anthony Albanese caught COVID, stepping up with quite a lot of aplomb in the press conferences and an arsenal of dad jokes, but somebody with a lot of experience now who will be the Education Minister.
Collins MP as Minister for Housing and Minister for Homelessness and Minister for Small Business.
Ms Collins, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Minister for Housing, Minister for Homelessness and Minister for Small Business.
I, Julie Marie Collins, do solemnly...
All right, and just briefly while Julie Collins is taking her oath, we're going to say goodbye to those who are leaving us on ABC TV, but you can continue watching this on ABC News Channel.
Minister for Homelessness and Minister for Small Business.
Julie Collins, Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Small Business, Tasmanian MP elected to Parliament back in 2007, so another long-serving Labor MP with a fair bit of experience. This was not the role she held in opposition. She was the agriculture spokeswoman. She now moves into housing, homelessness, obviously housing, a hot-button issue right now.
To be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Minister for Communications.
Ms Rowland, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Michelle Ann Rowland, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do swear that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council, so help me God.
Michelle Rowland now becoming the new Minister for Communications, the member for Greenway in Western Sydney. She's also becoming the Executive Councillor. She's not changing her portfolio. She's been acting in communications for some time now. She was elected in 2010.
The oath of office as Minister for Communications.
I, Michelle Ann Rowland, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Minister for Communications. So help me God.
Michelle actually had a big swing towards her in her seat of, at last time I checked, about 8.6%, taking her up to a pretty comfortable margin of 61%. She'd been very critical of the New South Wales government's handling of the pandemic in her community, which was under a very harsh lockdown, while other parts of the city of Sydney were not. But coming the new Minister for Communications.
To be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Minister for Resources and Minister for Northern Australia.
Ms King, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Madeline Mary Harvey King, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do swear that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good governance of the Commonwealth of Australia, that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council, so help me God.
Madeline King, the Minister for Resources and Northern Australia. Now, a slight change from her opposition portfolios. She did hold trade. That has now been handed over to Senator Don Farrell, but Madeline King remains in Cabinet. Now, she is a West Australian MP elected in 2016. She had a massive...
The oath of office as Minister for Resources and Minister for Northern Australia.
I, Madeline Mary Harvey King, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the offices of Minister for Resources and Minister for Northern Australia, so help me God.
Madeline King there, officially being sworn in as Minister. I was saying she enjoyed a massive swing towards her in Western Australia. She was really indicative of the massive success that Labor enjoyed in Western Australia, and that is why there are a few more West Australians being sworn in to front bench positions. Madeline King, she's a former solicitor, Chief of Staff at the University of Western Australia before entering federal parliament.
To be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry and Minister for Emergency Management.
Mr White, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Murray Patrick Watt, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment
and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
This is Queensland Senator Murray Watt, who really is a beneficiary of the reshuffle announced by the Prime Minister last night. He holds on to the emergency management portfolio but picks up agriculture and comes into Cabinet. He's somebody...
I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry and Minister for Emergency Management.
I, Murray Patrick Watt, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the offices of Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry and the Minister for Emergency Management.
As I said there, continuing on with his emergency management responsibilities, he was very critical of the federal government's response to the floods in his home state of Queensland and northern New South Wales, but also really made a name for himself, as many senators do during estimates hearing. He's a former lawyer with Maurice Blackburn, quite a forensic mind, and a former advisor to the former Queensland Premier Anna Bligh.
The Honourable Ed Husick MP as Minister for Industry and Science.
Mr Husick, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Minister for Industry and Science.
I, Edmund Nuruddin Husick, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Minister for Industry and Science, so help me God.
Ed Husick, New South Wales MP, who holds the seat of Chifley in Western Sydney, sworn in as Australia's new Minister for Industry and Science, the same role he held in opposition. This is another first for Australia. Mr Husick, the first Muslim member of Cabinet. A big moment for Mr Husick. He was elected back in 2010, so just at the tail end of, during the Gillard government, but this is his first time in Cabinet.
Ms Claire O'Neill MP to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Cyber Security.
So now I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Claire Ellen O'Neill, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do swear that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council, so help me God.
Claire O'Neill is the last Cabinet Minister to be sworn in today. This is a big promotion for her. She had been acting in the aged care space, now filling in and taking over Home Affairs. Of course, Christina Keneally would have been slated for this position, but she was not elected, not picking up Fowler.
The oath of office as Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Cyber Security.
I, Claire Ellen O'Neill, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the offices of Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Cyber Security, so help me God.
Claire O'Neill was elected in 2013, so no experience in government, but she has been a shadow minister for Justice and Financial Services, as long as taking a real interest in aged care. There was talk of her as well running for deputy of the Labor Party after the 2019 election. That didn't happen, but certainly a very prominent role in the Albanese government and a big promotion for Claire O'Neill.
We now move from Cabinet to the Outer Ministry, with 7 ministers in the Outer Ministry, 12 in the Assistant Minister roles.
MP to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Minister for Veterans Affairs and Minister for Defence Personnel.
Ms Gow, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Executive Councillor. I, Matthew James Keogh, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do swear that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council. So help me God.
Matt Keogh. Now, he's being sworn into the Executive Council. You will have noticed a whole bunch of ministers have been. This is a legal and constitutional body responsible for advising the Governor-General. They effectively are responsible for legally enacting decisions of Cabinet. For those close watchers of politics, it's the version of Privy Council in the UK.
As Minister for Veterans Affairs and Minister for Defence Personnel. I, Matthew James Keogh, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the offices of Minister for Veterans Affairs and Minister for Defence Personnel. So help me God.
And Matt Keogh, they're sworn into his portfolio of Veterans Affairs, a ministerial position, not in Cabinet, but this is a big promotion for Mr Keogh. He was elected in 2016, another West Australian rewarded for Labor's enormous electoral success in the West. He'll be working very closely with Defence Minister Richard Marles, and of course during the campaign, Labor promised about $500 million focus on Veterans Affairs to clear the backlog of claims.
MP to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Minister for Defence Industry and Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Mr Conroy, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Patrick Martin Conroy, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my knowledge and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
Pat Conroy, the member for Shorten in New South Wales, becoming the Minister for Defence Industry and International Relations and the Pacific. And as we were talking about earlier, when Foreign Minister Penny Wong was signed in, quite a task ahead of him there.
The affirmation of office as Minister for Defence Industry and Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
I, Patrick Martin Conroy, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the offices of Minister for Defence Industry and Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Mr Conroy is one of those Labor figures who've had almost a decade in opposition, waiting for this moment. He's a factional player from the left of the party. He was actually an electorate office to Anthony Albanese more than 20 years ago. Now, of course, Anthony Albanese is the Prime Minister and he is a minister in his government. He worked with the CFMEU briefly before being an advisor to Greg Combay.
MP to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services.
Mr Jones, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Stephen Patrick Jones, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do swear that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council, so help me God.
Another member of the Executive Council, Stephen Jones, before he is officially sworn in as the Assistant Treasurer, a role that he'll be working very closely in with the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers.
Mr Jones, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services.
I, Stephen Patrick Jones, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the offices of Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services, so help me God.
There is officially sworn in Stephen Jones as the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services. Now, that is a role that will have a fair bit to do with superannuation, and you will have remembered during opposition, Mr Jones had a very big role in really fighting the coalition's attempts to change Australia's super system and allow people to access their super before retirement. This is his first frontbench position in government. He was elected back in 2010, so has some experience in government itself, but this is his first time on the front bench.
Mr Andrew Giles MP to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Mr Giles, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Andrew James Giles, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
Andrew Giles becoming the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. He's been working in this space for some time. Quite an interesting background before coming into politics. He was a lawyer who worked on behalf of asylum seekers on the Tampa.
The affirmation of office as Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
I, Andrew James Giles, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Minister of Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Mr Giles is a player in the left faction of the Labor Party. He hasn't been in government. Of course, he'll be needing to lean on those who have. He is somebody as well who, during the pandemic, took quite an interesting lead on the issue of loneliness, which is very pertinent to many Australians who were locked away with their lives changed. But he certainly has a challenge ahead of him now in government.
Dr Anne Arley, MP, to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Minister for Early Childhood Education and Minister for Youth.
Dr Alley, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Anne Azza Ali, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential declarations of the Council.
Anne Arley, a big promotion for the West Australian MP. She is taking on the role of Early Childhood Education Minister. So she'll be working very closely with both the Education Minister, Jason Clare, and Social Services Minister, Amanda Rishworth. And you'll notice there, Dr Arley holding a Quran. This is part of a much more diverse cabinet.
The oath of office as Minister for Early Childhood Education and Minister for Youth.
I, Anne Azza Ali, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the offices of Minister for Early Childhood and Education and Minister for Youth.
Dr Arley there, as we were saying, holding the Quran to take her oath, part of a much more diverse frontbench team with Anthony Albanese. She is the first Muslim woman to be serving on a front bench. So lots of firsts here today at this swearing-in, shaking Governor-General David Burley's hand there. A big moment for Dr Anne Arley.
Ms Annika Wells, MP, to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Minister for Aged Care and Minister for Sport.
As well as I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Annika Shea Wells, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
Annika Wells, another Labor MP who's had a big promotion coming into government. She will be the Minister for Aged Care and Sport, seen as a rising star in the Labor Party, elected in 2019, so just within 3 years now she's moving into ministry.
And subscribe the affirmation of office for Minister for Aged Care and Minister for Sport.
I, Annika Shea Wells, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the offices of Minister for Aged Care and Minister for Sport.
Annika Wells is the member for Lily in Brisbane. Was an ultra-marginal seat. There was a big swing towards her at this election. So a promotion acknowledging her performance as a campaigner, but also as a politician as well. She'll have a job of acting on the promises that Labor made about aged care. Talking this morning as well about Labor's plan for aged care workers to have a pay increase.
Ms Christy McBain MP, to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
A huge promotion here for Christy McBain.
I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as an Executive Councillor.
I, Christy Louise McBain, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
Christy McBain, Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. When I say a big promotion, I say that because she's been in Parliament for just shy of 2 years and she is already on the front bench, named as an Assistant Minister.
I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
I, Christy Louise McBain, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Christy McBain, the member for... Someone has not got their phone on silent. Christy McBain, of course, is the member for Eden Monero. She won it in the by-election back in 2020. She got a special... She got a special shout out from Anthony Albanese last night when he announced his front bench. And of course, she rose to prominence really as the Mayor of Bega Valley during the Black Summer of bushfires in 2019-2020.
The Honourable Justine Elliott MP as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Social Services, to be known as Assistant Minister for Social Services and Assistant Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence.
And we're now moving on to the Assistant Ministers with the Cabinet Ministers and the Ministers.
So I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as a Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Social Services.
I, Maria Justine Elliott, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia in the office of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Social Services. So help me God.
Justine, Elliott being sworn in. She's the member for Richmond, which was a reasonably tight swing. There was a swing towards Labor this time around. Elected in 2004, so plenty of experience in Parliament. Interesting experience before coming into federal politics as well. For 7 years, she was a police officer, so something in common with the now current leader of the Liberal Party in Peter Dutton.
The Honourable Matt Thistlethwaite MP as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Defence and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Parliamentary Secretary to the Attorney-General, to be known as Assistant Minister for Defence and Assistant Minister for Veterans Affairs and Assistant Minister for the Republic.
Mr Thistlethwaite, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Defence, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Parliamentary Secretary to the Attorney-General.
I, Matthew James Thistlethwaite, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the offices of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Defence and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Parliamentary Secretary to the Attorney-General, so help me God.
Matt Thistlethwaite there signed into his Assistant Minister roles, the second of 12 Assistant Ministers to be sworn in today. Now, interestingly, you would have heard Assistant Minister for Defence, Veterans Affairs and to the Republic. So another statement from Labor about one of its priorities, although we understand potentially not a first-term priority for this government. A New South Wales MP elected in 2010 and who served as a Parliamentary Secretary or Assistant Minister in the Rudd and Gillard governments.
The Honourable Dr Andrew Leigh as Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, to be known as Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities and Treasury.
Dr. Leigh, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasury.
I, Andrew Keith-Lee, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the office of Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasury.
Andrew Leigh, the member for Fenner in the ACT, becoming the Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities and Treasury. He's a bit of an oddity in the Labor Party in that he's factionally non-aligned. Now, while that may have hurt him in previous reshuffles, he is regarded as somebody who's well across his brief, who is a former Professor of Economics at the Australian National University and played a keen eye on JobKeeper spending over the last few years.
MP to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, to be known as Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister.
Mr Gorman, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as an Executive Councillor.
I, Patrick Possum Gorman, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the persons for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
Yes, you heard correctly. Patrick Possum Gorman, one of the more unique names in this federal parliament. Mr Gorman, a West Australian MP, being sworn into the Executive Council, as we mentioned earlier, a group of ministers responsible for effectively legally enacting decisions of Cabinet before his
Gorman, I ask you to
Assistant Ministry role.
The affirmation of office as Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
I, Patrick Possum Gorman, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
There it is, Patrick Gorman sworn in as the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister. It's a role that used to be called the Parliamentary Secretary, now is used alternately with Assistant Minister. A West Australian MP elected in 2018 who also had a big swing towards him at the election and is also being rewarded for Labor's electoral success in the West. He used to work for former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Kevin Rudd, so is now in government, not working for it.
As Executive Councillor and as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Environment and Water, to be known as Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Jennifer Mcallister, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
New South Wales Senator Jenny Mcallister becoming the Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy. She's a senior player in the left faction of the party, had built a name for herself as a performer in Senate estimates. Selected by the New South Wales Parliament in 2015 to replace the former Senator John Faulkner.
Now, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
I, Jennifer Mcallister, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the office of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Senator Mcallister would have been in line for a further promotion than this, but of course she's from the left of the party and the factions are putting forward names of people to be promoted, and Arley ending up in the ministry. But certainly Senator Mcallister has a lot of experience as well, a former president of the federal ALP before coming into federal parliament. Having a moment there with the Governor-General posing for the cameras as well.
Senator Carol Brown to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government, to be known as Assistant Minister for Infrastructure and Transport.
Ms Brown, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Carol Louise Brown, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
Carol Brown being sworn in as the Assistant Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, a role in which she'll work very closely with the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, Catherine King. Perhaps a lesser-known face on the front bench, Senator Brown is from Tasmania. She's actually served for a very long time, elected back in 2005.
The affirmation of office as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
I, Carol Louise Brown, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Signing her commission now as Assistant Minister. She's got 17 years of experience in the Senate, and in the final years of the last Labor government, about a decade ago, she was the Deputy Whip in the Senate. Shaking hands now with David Hurley. It's not yet clear who the whips in this new parliament will be, the people responsible for maintaining numbers and discipline.
To be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Health and Aged Care, to be known as Assistant Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Ms Curtin, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Geraldine Mary Carney, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia
to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
Jed Carney, a former president of the ACTU for 8 years, a very influential union figure, and her background before entering politics is relevant to her role as Assistant Minister for Health and Aged Care. She represented aged care nurses.
Affirmation of office as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
I, Geraldine Mary Carney, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
And not only did she represent aged care nurses, she was a former deputy director of nursing herself. So her experience in those roles will be an asset to Labor as it seeks to change the working conditions for those in the aged care sector. She is the member for Cooper, an interesting seat in Melbourne. There was a swing towards the Greens at this election, but still a relatively safe margin moving forward.
Ms Emma McBride MP to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Health and Aged Care, to be known as Assistant Minister for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention and Assistant Minister for Rural and Regional Health.
Mr. McBride, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Emma Margaret McBride, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do swear that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council, so help me God.
Emma McBride, another new face on the front bench, elected in 2016 to the New South Wales seat of Dobell. She has managed to not only hold on to that seat, but increase her margin at the election. So this is seen somewhat as a reward for that. The first job of an MP, of course, is to actually keep their seat to ensure that a party can win government.
Ms McBride, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
I, Emma Margaret McBride, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Health and Aged Care, so help me God.
And Emma McBride there, sworn in as the Assistant Minister for Mental Health and for Rural and Regional Health. Again, roles that she'll be working very closely in with the Health Minister, Mark Butler. Holding her Bible there, taking hands with the Governor-General, David Hurley. This would be quite a thrill for Ms McBride, only her third term in government, in Parliament I should say, now in government and on the front bench.
McCarthy unfortunately cannot be with us today due to circumstances which we've all been through in recent times. She will be appointed as an Executive Councillor and as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Indigenous Australians and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Health and Aged Care, to be known as Assistant Minister for Indigenous Australians and Assistant Minister for Indigenous Health. Senator McCarthy will be sworn in at a later date.
Some applause there for the Northern Territory Senator Alan Deary McCarthy, who cannot be here today.
Your Excellency, I present Senator Tim Ayers to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Trade and Tourism and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Industry and Science, to be known as Assistant Minister for Trade and Assistant Minister for Manufacturing.
Mr Ayers, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation as Executive Councillor.
I,
Timothy Ayers, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
This is the New South Wales Senator Tim Ayers being sworn in as the Assistant Minister for Trade and Manufacturing. This is a promotion for him. He's one of the Labor MPs that are relatively new to Parliament, elected in 2019.
I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Trade and Tourism and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Industry and Science.
I, Timothy Ayers, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people, in the offices of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Trade and Tourism and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Tim Ayers was a union organiser for the Australian Workers' Union before coming into Parliament, so that background in manufacturing will help him in this role. He rose through the ranks as well to become the Secretary of the New South Wales and the ACT branch. Like many new senators making a name for himself on committees, he is on a range of committees and tends to run from one Senate estimates hearing to another.
Senator Anthony Chisholm to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Education and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories, to be known as Assistant Minister for Education and Assistant Minister for Regional Development.
Mr Chisholm, I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Anthony David Chisholm, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do swear that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council. So help me God.
Anthony Chisholm there, Queensland Senator, elected back in 2016, so another relative newbie, as Anthony Albanese was describing last night. Now, he is from Queensland, a state that has now not really delivered for Labor at this election nor the last.
I invite you to take and subscribe the oath of office as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Education and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
I, Anthony David Chisholm, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the offices of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Education and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. So help me God.
Anthony Chisholm there, the Assistant Minister for Education and Regional Development. Now, as a Queenslander, as I was mentioning, a state that hasn't really delivered for Labor at the past two elections. So his elevation into the Assistant Minister role would also be seen as a move to try and elevate issues relevant to Queensland. It's a very big state electorally and one that Labor wants to obviously improve its electoral fortunes in.
Mr Tim Watts MP to be sworn as Executive Councillor and as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, to be known as Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr Watts, I invite you to take and subscribe the affirmation of office as Executive Councillor.
I, Timothy Graham Watts, being chosen and summoned by the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia to be a member of the Federal Executive Council, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, when required, advise the Governor-General or the person for the time being administering the government of the Commonwealth of Australia to the best of my judgment and consistently with the good government of the Commonwealth of Australia, and that I will not disclose the confidential deliberations of the Council.
Tim Watts is one of those Labor MPs who've been waiting almost a decade for a taste of government. As he's sworn in there as the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, it's something of a change in focus for him. He has for many years been dealing with cyber security and also taking an interest in social media.
Affirmation of office as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Foreign Affairs.
I, Timothy Graham Watts, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will, well and truly, serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
And despite the new portfolio title, Tim Watts has taken an interest in foreign affairs for many years, particularly in Indonesia and our region. He represents the seat of Gellibrand in Western Melbourne. A slight swing towards the Liberals, but still quite safe as he shakes hands with the Governor-General there.
Your Excellency, that concludes the presentation of the Ministry. I congratulate, as Prime Minister, all those who've been sworn in or taken the oath of office this morning.
All right, well, that brings to a conclusion the formal aspects of this ceremony. Anthony Albanese's 42-strong front bench have officially been sworn in, all except, of course, Melandiri McCarthy, the Assistant Minister for Indigenous Australians, who couldn't be there today. And there we have it, a nice family moment with Jim Chalmers, the new Treasurer, and his son, who couldn't quite wait for him to stand up before coming over to congratulate his dad on his big new job.
A very patient child, that ceremony going for just over an hour, Jane, which is a long time for any child to wait patiently without making any noise. One of the things that struck me, Jane, when we were reading through the introductions as to where people were from and what they were doing was the amount of experience that many of these Labor MPs have. If they weren't part of the government previously, from 2010 to 2013, then they had some sort of ministerial responsibilities as well. That is going to help the Labor Party because they won't necessarily all be newbies. And now we get to the next stage of events, which is the class photo on the steps of Government House with the Governor-General leading the way. It'll be a slightly different occasion to last week where you only had 5 people standing there, so there was no real...
This one has grown exponentially.
Jostling for positions. David Hurley making it clear where he'll be sitting and bringing the Prime Minister alongside him.
And Richard Miles. So this is the class photo. And I mean, it's really a chance for all of these MPs to take in this moment. Many have sat on the opposition benches for 9 long years waiting for this moment. Others have only experienced opposition. And for some, looking at Anthony Albanese, Richard Miles, Tanya Plibasek, they have great deal of experience in government, having served in the Rudd and Gillard governments. So really a momentous occasion. And as well as both, Henry, the experience that you've noted, as well as fresh faces, this is also a remarkably diverse front bench. Parliament is meant to reflect the community they represent, and arguably this front bench goes further than any before it.
In many ways as well. Anthony Albanese quite keen last night to point out that there are 10 women in the cabinet. He says that this is the highest number of women that have been serving in a cabinet, but there were a range of firsts beyond that, Jane. We had 2 Muslim ministers sworn into office for the first time as Penny Wong takes her spot at the front of the photo there, and Arley from Western Australia and Ed Husick both signed in with the Quran. And then we had Linda Burney, of course, who got the biggest cheer, I think, by judging there. She is the first Indigenous woman to be the Indigenous Affairs Minister. So certainly a lot of moments of reflection for everybody.
Yeah.
They've waited a long time to get in here, but it is particularly important for some.
I can say the look of happiness and joy on their faces, having this long-awaited photo on the steps of Government House alongside the Governor-General, Sir David Hurley.
And now the work begins, really. There'll be a few moments after this for reflections with the family, as we can see Anthony Albanese there looking at pretty ease and enjoying it. But after this, a lot of these people are going into new portfolios, so they weren't necessarily focusing on while they were in opposition. So there's going to be a lot of briefings, particularly those people that have found themselves going from the backbench right into the ministry. Just think of Annika Wells, the Queensland MP. Well, she's going into aged care, an incredibly complex portfolio, and one in which Labor have made some pretty ambitious policy offerings as well, a commitment to have a trained nurse in every home for at least every hour of the day. Now, that's quite a challenge that she'll have to be getting ahead of.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for our viewers, there's sort of a variety of photos that will be taken. This is all of the front bench together, more than 40 members. There'll then be, I suspect, cabinet, as well as Anthony Albanese with the women of the Labor Party. During the campaign, there was a really big focus on the fact that Labor is nearly at gender equity. Its cabinet not quite, but very, very close to it, but certainly a big focus on ensuring that, considering we've got half a population of women, that they are well represented in this cabinet, and certainly a big focus for Mr Albanese as he put together his front bench. And Henry Bello, one of the unique aspects of Labor is not only is gender a big factor, but so are the factions. You have a right and a left faction, and that really also determines who is put into the front bench. The portfolios are then assigned by Mr Albanese.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why we saw certain names put forward for new entries to the ministry. Annika Wells, Christy McBain, and also Anne Arley. Jenny Mcallister, somebody as well from the left of the party. Now, many people would believe that she would have been promoted as well, but because of the factional dealings, there was really only one spot for her to push forward. As we're looking at these pictures as well, Jane Norman, I'm sort of reminded as well of the emissions of people who would normally be here, or certainly were planning to be, as Anthony Albanese stands beside the former leader of the Labor Party, Bill Shorten there. And I'm referring to Christina Keneally, who did not pick up the seat of Fowler, and also Terry Butler as well. Now, because they didn't pick up those two seats, it means that their portfolios needed to be reassigned. Home Affairs, a powerful portfolio that many people seek, and the Environment Minister. That also just really triggered a shuffling of the cards, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely did. And just for our viewers, we're going state by state. So this is now the Queensland team. You can see it's a little bit smaller than the New South Wales team and the West Australian team. But yeah, Henry, you're absolutely right. Christina Keneally tried to make the switch from the Senate to the New South Wales lower house seat of Fowler. She was defeated by independent Di Lee, and there has certainly been a lot of soul searching about that decision. We've got the West Australians coming now, and you can see it's a bigger team than it certainly was before the election. And so Christina Keneally was the Home Affairs Minister, so her portfolio has gone to Claire O'Neill, Victorian MP, and her role as the deputy sort of leader in the Senate, it's a leadership position, has gone to South Australian Don Farrell, and you can actually see Don Farrell there just to Mr Albanese's right. He has taken on a big portfolio in trade and tourism. And of course, the other person who would have been here today is, as you say, Terry Butler, the former Queensland member for Griffith. She lost her seat to the Greens, and she, of course, held the portfolio of environment. That has instead gone to Tanya Plibasek, member for New South Wales.
And of course, with Tanya Plibasek moving from education to environment, there's a new role for Jason Clare, who'll be moving across to the education portfolio, as Anthony Albanese has his arm around Katie Gallagher there, who will be the Finance Minister, also the Minister for the Public Service. Particularly important for Katie because she is a former Chief Minister of the ACT who knows the public service very, very well. But as I was saying about Jason Clare, well, I mean, many people got to know him a little bit more during the campaign and saw that he was quite a good media performer. But
his star is certainly on the rise during the campaign. For a man who'd been in Parliament for a long time, I think a lot of people were introduced to him during the campaign and really liked what they saw.
Yeah, that's right. And he does have a lot of history in government as well, in portfolio. So certainly a more prominent role for him, moving from housing to education.
All right, here we go. All of the Labor women on the front bench colourful bunch in their beautiful blazers surrounding Anthony Albanese, and this is certainly an image that Labor wants to project. It was a distinction between Labor and the Coalition. We've heard a lot about the fact that the Coalition, the Liberal Party, lost the votes of women, particularly professional women, so Labor wants to show voters that it is a party that both represents women and has women around the decision-making table. So a lot of female MPs there standing alongside the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
And it's a powerful symbol of what Labor wants to project as it comes into government, but of course it's the actions that they take in government as well that are going to be very important, as Anthony Albanese makes a joke there. Many people have been pointing out, though, that yes, there are a record number of women on the front bench, but it is less compared to the shadow cabinet, of course, with some of the portfolio positions needing to be rearranged as we get ready for the next photo. I'm not sure who will be next as Chris Bowen gets in line.
It's got some New South Wales. I think this might be the New South Wales team with Chris Bowen, Ed Husick, Michelle Rowland and Tony Burke and Jason Clare there. All pretty thrilled at their promotions. And Henry, we don't yet know who is going to be the pairing of these ministers in the shadow portfolios. And it's interesting because Peter Dutton, the new Liberal leader, and his deputy Susan Lee will be closely watching who has been handed portfolios in the Labor government before they decide who might take on the opposition shadow versions, right? Because they want to they want to sort of pair people up specifically.
Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? I guess some people call that the first move advantage, isn't it? But Peter Dutton has said that he will be outlining his shadow ministry in the by the end of the week. He'll be coming up with that announcement. So yeah, Jane, there'll be a lot of focus on who has been put forward into these portfolios. You can bet that Peter Dutton is also going to be having discussions with colleagues. Who do you naturally sit up against there? What are the certain personalities that we can bounce off here as they prepare to go into 3 years of opposition rather than government?
And because the losses have been so great on the Liberal side, about 18 seats lost, it's not exactly obvious who might take on those shadow portfolios. But of course, the big focus today is the new government and the front bench that has been sworn in. Joining us here for the first time on ABC, we have just witnessed the swearing in of Anthony Albanese's new cabinet, 23 members, and outer ministry and assistant ministerial positions, so 42 members sworn in today. And Henry Bello, Mr Albanese has made it very clear he doesn't want to waste a moment. 3 years of governing seems like a long time, but it actually isn't. We've got a cabinet meeting today. Tomorrow will be the first meeting of the Expenditure Review Committee, which is known colloquially as the Razor Gang, before the National Security Committee of Cabinet meets.
Yeah, and I think that's where you're going to have to lean on the people who've been in government before, who've held ministerial responsibilities, and call on their experience on this. Those people who are going into new portfolios are going to have to be briefed very quickly by their seniors or by the public servants, heads of departments, as to their portfolios. If you think of somebody like Claire O'Neill, she's coming into an incredibly complicated and important
and
policy
huge portfolio,
platform.
right?
Home affairs, incredibly important. She's going to need to be brushing up on that because, of course, during the campaign, she was responsible for aged care, and she's not the only person who's going to have a shift of focus now. Yeah,
that's right. Of course, Tanya Plibasek, another interesting change. She was the Education Minister for most of her time in opposition. She's now switched to Environment and Water. Water can be seen sometimes as a bit of a poison chalice, because this minister is responsible for the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, a huge policy area that's highly contentious. The Murray-Darling running from Queensland right down to South Australia, and competing concerns between environmentalists and farmers. So that will be a very meaty policy area for Tanya Plibasek to sink her teeth into. Now, just before we finish up coverage here, I should let it be known that Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, who has been briefed for about a week, so he's had a bit of a head start. He will be making his first big economic statement at midday today. We'll bring you that when he reveals the national accounts. So the work of government absolutely beginning. But Henry Bello, what are your sort of reflections on the front bench swearing-ins that we've just witnessed?
Well, I think it's hard to go past the different diversity and the makeup of the parliament, with 2 Muslim ministers signed in, more women than previously before. The first women Indigenous minister sworn into cabinet. It's pretty hard to go past that. And then, of course, there's Penny Wong.
Absolutely. First foreign-born foreign minister, and she's already sort of made her mark in the Pacific. So a lot of firsts today, an historic day, change of government, change of front bench. But that's where we'll leave it here at Parliament House. Stay tuned to ABC News for the rest of the day.
Warm up with Gardening Australia.
It's a great time of the year to get out into the garden.
We dig into what makes healthy soil.
So no synthetic fertilisers, no pesticides, herbicides, fungicides.
Show you how to fuel your garden for free.
It might cost a little bit of time and effort, but it is well worth it.
And meet a botanical artist with a passion for prints.
Being able to put beautiful fabrics on people's bodies and then they care more about that plant, that's pretty good for me.
Gardening Australia, Friday on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Journey to